What is up, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the World's Pink Board. Trevor McNeil coming at you one more time here. Like I said, Worlds may be over, but our content is not. And this episode, we just said, fuck it, we're doing it live. No real script around this one. Every piece of content I've made up to this point has all been scripted, well thought out. This one is not that, but I just want to kind of recap and go over Worlds from best of my ability. Memory's not so great these days, especially when it comes to consuming an egregious amount of League of Legends content in such a short time, which is also something that I will be talking about at some point as well, the timeline of Worlds. But to take it back from the very beginning, where we all started with this one, with the play-ins, Invictus Gaming and T1, of course, that would be the very first series, the first best of 5 T1 plays on their routes to winning the Worlds Finals here just a few days ago. And from that, October 14th being a best of 5 play-in, and then immediately turning around to the Swiss stages in October 15th, a 24-hour turn. I'm not too upset about that. A lot of what the timeline, you know what, we'll just go off the rip. We'll just start with the timeline right here. The timeline of League of Legends Worlds has been slightly fluid. There's been changes year over year as to which ones work out best. You know, we have some days where the Swiss stages will play out, and then you have a few days in between. Then you get into the quarterfinals, you get a few days in between, you get to the semifinals, another few days, and then you get to the actual finals. This time around, we played through the Swiss I. What is the plural of Swiss? Like if you're playing in the Swiss stage. And those are relatively back-to-back-to-back. Is the end-all be-all of this one. They're pretty much all just consecutive from the 14th through, I think, the 25th or 26th. 25th, it looks like it was the last day of the Swiss stages. So pretty much almost 2 weeks straight of best of ones, best of threes to get through into the quarterfinal stages to make the teams that qualify. And then after that, you do get a few days break before you get into the quarterfinals. But then the quarterfinals and the semifinals are back-to-back. It's a 3 or 4 day span that has all of those knockouts before a full 7-day break before the finals. And a lot of people, there's a pretty solid divided line between people that want more gameplay spread out equally versus those that wanted the layout like it was this year, where you have a full 7 days between A and B. Now, day of the week, I think is perfect. I think you want it on a weekend. I think it sucks that you have to cater to time zones. I do believe also that if you look at viewership, a lot of the viewership is probably coming from not English-speaking countries primarily. A lot of it's going to be China and Korea that I would wager, because they actually appreciate the culture of esports more than we do, and more than Europe does as well. Europe, I think, has the edge over North America, but given how much it has to contend with and compete with in North America, I think esports just isn't respected to get the viewership like it does. Now, that's not going to take away from the viewership that it does get, because it gets a lot. But it's hard to cater to the time zones, and I think putting it on a weekend was best case scenario here for North America, because that game started at, I think, 1 o'clock in the morning here in Central Time, which was perfect, because I was able to at least stay up, watch the first 2 or 3 games, and then crash out before waking up into being able to watch the last couple of games the following morning. If I was a real ride or die, I would have stayed up all night, but I'm not. I know that the finals aren't going to be anywhere. It's going to be on YouTube anyway, so I can just rewatch it the next day. But given in that time zone, that's probably best case scenario. But I do wish I would have preferred to have it where the quarterfinals were 3 or 4 days after Swiss stages. They play out probably 3 days. And then you play those 4 matches, 2 on each day. And then you take a 48-hour break. And then you play a semifinal match and a semifinal match. And then you take probably a 72-hour break. 3 days later, you play the grand finals in a best of 5. So you at least get something more spread out. But the downside to that is, like, if you start the quarterfinals on a Saturday, your semifinal matchups are going to be on like a Tuesday, and then your finals are going to be on like a Friday or a Saturday. So you still get the ability to have it on a primetime day where you'll have viewership and visibility, but you lose out. You're going to have a dip there in the middle because of the semifinals being on a weekday. And that sucks. But if you take it like anything that it was this year, I don't think you're really losing out on much. The semifinals this year were not great. The quarterfinals matchups were leagues above, I think, what the semifinals were. But if you lose out on that viewership, how bad do you really feel about that one? But regardless, that's the timeline scheduling. So we started out with T1 playing in their knockouts on the 14th, immediately turn into the Swiss stages where we got to see the representatives from across the world. I know that there was a graph that someone had put out on the League of Legends Esports that had the rankings of the quote-unquote toughest draws and who had the easiest draws through Swiss and through the qualifications. And they gave credit to like 100 Thieves, Anyone's Legend, and PSG, I believe, were the top three that had the hardest draws. And I don't disagree with that. I think 100 Thieves had a pretty tough schedule. They did end up playing BLG in their first round. They played Top Esports in the second one, and it was a bad time. Then they get HLE in their third one, and that's just brutal. I don't think that there's anything to say about how bad that was for 100 Thieves. Granted, they played their hearts out on the elimination match, but just could not get what they needed out of that one. 100 Thieves actually probably looked like the best North American team that we had representing. Surprisingly so, given how good FlyQuest had played throughout the entirety of the last split. But North America does what North America does, and they didn't do anything. Didn't even get into a point where they could contend for a World's Championship to get out of and into the qualifying, as FlyQuest ended up losing to G2, who would then go on into the qualification stages, and they would lose out in their quarterfinals to Top Esports. Now, when I was talking about Worlds and going through, my pick'ems fell apart completely because I had Genji and Anyone's Legend facing off in the finals, but I also made the contention that the Genji HLE and Anyone's Legend T1 opening games are like, those are finals caliber matchups, and those realistically probably should have been a finals series, and that's why when I always say, when I just said that semifinals being on a weekday, if you schedule it that way where you have a few days in between, you take a dip, that's because you're getting the highest quality gameplay on your quarterfinal days, which is completely random. You know, they fish around the bowl, pick the name, and oh, look, there it is. So there is the random percent chance of as to what the actual matches are going to be, but I think the quarterfinal matches were probably the best matches of Worlds this year. Granted, the Telecom Wars in the finals was actually pretty solid as well, but kind of fell apart there at the end. But those quarterfinals were certified bangers through and through. So, sucks that the first two that were the ones that I had winning finals, I mean, myself and probably anybody else that's has half a brain would probably have guessed that the winner of those two matches is going to be the two teams that meet in the finals. And then from there, coin toss it as to who's going to win that one. I don't think anybody really expected KT to get to where they were as well as they played, but they managed to do it. And T1 really only had Anyone's Legend standing in their way. I think the top half of the bracket was easier, all things considered, but that's because you just had Genji HLE in the bottom side. And those two teams alone are already problematic. KT Rolster is just a little bit of a curve in the plans, but CFO, I think, just because of the talent pool that they have, was kind of already counted out as soon as they got the draw. But looking at what those teams on the top and the bottom, the T1AL, Genji HLE matchup, that would have been the expectations for a lot of people to make it to finals. They didn't do so. KT Rolster actually ends up beating Genji 3-1. And then from KT's initial series in their quarters over CFO. They look good, but of course it was, we said it was against CFO. It's LCP teams. So like, how good are they really? We don't know. As soon as they get to play against Gen G, that's a real team. Granted, KT showed signs of life there in the LCK finals, or through the LCK playoffs, but how much of that really holds over? Because that was a month ago. So here we are in Worlds. Is that really going to hold up? Is Gen G now a different team? Church of Chovy, how much are we going to believe and sell into this one? And KT Rolster hadn't been here before. They don't really know. And, you play that storyline out like, oh, they can't perform under pressure. They've never been this far in Worlds. And it's like, they're just playing League of Legends, dude. Like, yeah, there's a huge arena and a bunch of people there. But outside of that, they're just playing the game that they love and that they play hours upon hours upon hours of. So it's not like it's asking too much or changing the scenario too much for them. So the fact that they're just playing a really solid opponent in Gen G, you can't take too much credit away from them. They end up taking that series 3-1. So putting KT into the finals against T1 is already a curveball that I don't think anybody would have expected, because we probably did not expect the Telecom Wars in that one. But how great for the narrative, given how long of a history the Telecom Wars has. I know a lot of people are tired of T1, and I can understand, the resonation with that. It's like watching the same 4A high school football team win a state championship like 8 out of 10 years because they have one of the toughest schedules and they play terrible. And I don't say terrible. They don't play well enough to beat all of these teams that are clearly a higher class than them. But as soon as it gets into their division's playoffs, they're like 2-8, and then they just beat the hell out of everybody else because they are playing the toughest teams, and they're playing those teams closely, relatively speaking, so it just makes them better for their level of competition. And that's kind of what I guess you would point the finger at T1, because the LCK just beats up on everybody all the time. The LCK gets 4 teams into the quarterfinals. They get all 4 teams qualified, and then they have 2 teams in the World's finals. Like, I get it. People are tired of seeing the LCK, but nobody can beat them. So something has to be done for these teams to be able to find a way to beat and dethrone the LCK. Not only the LCK, but T1 and Faker. The continuity of the contracts that T1 has had, and also just how they can build around a core component and have a single identity in Faker, and then work with that as a foundation to build a roster around. It's impressive, to say the least, especially with the volatility that the market has, especially with the consideration of mandatory military service that some of those countries over there have. Like, there are just unknown variables that you have to contend with quite frequently. But winning over and over and over again gives T1 at least a pretty deep pocketbook that they can probably pay pretty well to maintain their rosters and to also sign top talent. So T1 probably not in any concern whatsoever. Then you flip to the other side of where we're at here with the LTA, now back to the LCS, the EU LCS, LEC, and they just don't have the same infrastructure and the same resources as the likes of the LCK, the LPL. So where the contest is going to have to come from is the LPL, but have they hit their cap? I mean, they have to find a secondary talent pool to be able to take over what the LCK has done for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years now, where there's only been a few of the LPL championships compared to the LCK, who has run rampant here in League of Legends esports. But a lot of this consideration and contemplation goes more around the scheduling. Obviously, you would look at some of the teams that have qualified, and based off of which regions have how many teams they're allowed to bring into Worlds. And with the restructuring of some of the organizations in the leagues themselves, numbers will be fluctuating a little bit, but you still have to look at the same amount of LCK and LPL teams, because they're not changing, because that system's not broken. They get the viewership, they have the money, so that's not going to change. It's up to the rest of the world to try to find an answer for that. And we've been trying for 13, 14, 15 years now and have not been able to do so, because at the end of the day, they still give Faker all the coldest one-liners and every single World's opening stage, and what can we do? All roads lead to Faker. He's the unkillable Demon King. I mean, there's so many edits going around TikTok and YouTube right now about T1 and just how unbeatable they are. And so far, we have nothing to answer against that one. So I'm curious what you guys might think as to how does anybody dethrone not only just Faker and T1, but the LCK in it and of itself. Does the restructuring of bringing the LCS back, does that do anything for NA's hopes? Do we have all of a sudden a better chance to get someone into even the quarterfinals? Because the lack of representation from our standpoint with the amount of money I feel like we should have available is kind of embarrassing. The fact that we cannot get anything up there. So I'm also curious as to what your guys' hot takes might be. I know there's a lot of takes, such as the fact that BDD has to get off that team because he's out there like the LeBron James with nobody helping him out. If you're looking at, is T1 going to maintain? Are we going to be able to see a four-peat out of T1? I almost said SKT because that's the throwback. There'll always be SKT to me. Or are we going to see something more that is just a complete curveball out of this one? I want to know what your hot takes are down below. Do you think that we're going to see any of the above, and is North America ever going to get their fair chance? No. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. I will be posting more content. I do have a loose structure schedule that I'm trying to maintain. I'm also talking with some other content creators to try to maybe get some sort of collaboration going, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes. I would like to post another video here soon about all the roster moves that are currently happening, like I had alluded to with the LCS revival, how that's going to change at least our infrastructure locally and what that does for us in the States, as well as a couple other content pieces that I'm putting together that take some incredible time commitments, because I have to go back and watch every single second of every single game from the play-in stages through the World's Finals, because I'm looking for very specific niche things that requires my full attentiveness. So I have a lot of VOD reviews to do, but bear with me here. We got a couple of weeks here still of content creation that'll be coming out for the World's Pink Ward. Of course, my name's Trevor McNeil. Right now, though, I'm going to reset. I have to get my life together to figure out how I'm going to get this schedule out. I got to recall. I got to refill my ward so I get some vision on the future. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.